in the midst of, or just after their dramatic release of the State Department cables, I got a call from Mark Schmugger, former co-chairman of Universal, and he said, would you like to do this? And I leapt at it. I mean, it came at an inconvenient time. I was doing some other stuff, but I thought, I can't not do this. It's such an important story. And at the time, I thought it was about two things. I thought it was a simple David and Goliath story, meaning Julian Assange against the US government. And I thought it was about a leaking machine, this electronic Dropbox, and that was going to be very interesting. It ended up being something very different. I mean, Julian's character changed. I discovered the character of Bradley Manning throughout. He became a much more important figure. And also, rather than being about a leaking machine, it ended up being a story about human relationships in the time of the internet. And that, was also a very interesting revelation. So it, the scope of it changed very much as we were pursuing the story.
So as Bradley's story you started to discover that, how did you go about packaging it all together?
Well, we wanted the back and forth between Bradley and Julian. The problem we had, I mean, in addition to the fact that Julian didn't want to talk to me, or at least he didn't want to do an on-camera interview, I had a character who was in prison, and the United States government had no interest in letting me at him. So how would I present Bradley Manning's character? I mean, I could talk to other people about him. But in the course of making the film, another batch of these initial chats with Adrian Lama were released by Wired magazine. And when we saw that second batch, sort of the full portrait of Bradley's character came through, and we thought, well, wait a minute, maybe we can, rather than getting an actor to read them or whatever, we can actually show them as he saw them, as Adrian Lamo saw them, that is to say, to print them. And that led us down a road of trying to build into the film a whole sort of graphic component, but also to have this, a character that would exist primarily through the chats that he wrote down on his computer. That seemed to be a very intriguing idea, and we were terrified at first as to whether or not this would work, but over time we got the feeling that actually it was getting at a kind of intimacy, and it's a funny kind of intimacy because it's at once very isolating and intimate all at the same time, and of course he was communicating with a complete stranger. I got involved early on. I suspected that because so much of this story would be about the internet, and it became much more about the internet in a way, not only about secrets, what should be secret, what should not be secret, the surveillance state and all of that, but also about how we're all being changed by the internet. So I wanted to somehow find a way to make that come alive on screen, and I formed a partnership with this company called Framestore, which is a very well-known graphics company. They do a lot of title sequences. They did the special effects for Harry Potter. And the New York office in particular wanted to become involved at an early stage to be able to get involved in the story from the beginning. So that, very often when I work with a graphics company, they come in at the end, and you go through this process where they always show you beautiful stuff, but it's very often inappropriate for the story. So they were involved with the story from the beginning, and so particularly with these chats, we worked very long and hard to try to give them a character that wasn't just printed characters on a screen, but they felt like they were emanating from the screen, and there was something both handmade and computerish about them that would give the character of these two characters who communicate only by text, a sense of humanity.
Do you think that if you had a sit-down interview with Julian on screen, how do you think that would have changed the story, if at all?
I was given this assignment at a time when Julian had become an incredibly famous person. And by the time I approached him, and one of my executive producers was one of the people who actually put up some of the money for his bail. So I was plugged right into his camp. But he was already surrounded by agents and lawyers and hangers-on and political activists. So he had become a kind of human commodity. The more I learned about Julian, and I did meet him a number of times, but the more I learned about him through other people, the more convinced I wanted to find out and find a way to portray him prior to when he became famous. And I established a relationship with this wonderful Australian filmmaker, Mark Davis, who had followed him with just himself and a camera and a little mic on the camera. and gotten all this wonderful footage of Julian before he was famous. And that gives a flavor of the character of a more idealistic person who's in search of a dream but hasn't yet found it.